The anxious avoidance trap. 5 signs that, I might be in a relationship with an avoidant, or maybe I am. Thank you so much for joining us again on Second Act TV. So happy to welcome back Dr. Gary Salyer, the relationship expert and author of Safe to Love Again. Thanks for being here again, Gary.
Thank you, Silka.
Well, we just finished I think, a really interesting segment, which I will link to. It's love traps, 7 love traps that we need to be aware of, that we may be recreating or falling into, and things that's either holding us back or keeping us from finding love. And in this segment, there's one other trap that I found that I want to get your input on, and that is the anxious avoidance trap. It's what it's called. And I'm just fascinated with the whole attachment style anyway. To me, understanding attachment styles, what they represent, how we got to be where we are today, is just super interesting and valuable to how we handle relationships. And what I'd like your opinion on today is 5 signs that I might be in a relationship with an avoidant, or maybe I am. So the first one here, the uncontrollable need for distance, that the avoidant, just the minute they get close or feel like they're being trapped, they need to get away.
Yeah, they don't know they're feeling trapped, but they know it's just this ineffable, inexplorable, almost feeling I've got to go away. They're the ones that can be away from the office, on a vacation, not a vacation, but an office trip, a work trip for a week. And oh, honey, I love you, I love you, I love you. You come home on Friday night and make passionate love. And the next day, they don't know why. They just got to go in the office and get more stuff done. But that's a distancing trap. It's how we keep that old statement alive, right? That love is best served with some distance at an arm's length. I once dealt with a 2 avoidant couple, which you don't hardly ever see because there's not enough glue to keep them together. And the funny thing was she began to think, college professor, hey, maybe there's more to love than this after 12 years. And when I worked with him to start saying, hey, maybe you want to be able to go in and have TV with her and watch TV with her at night instead of 2 separate rooms, she's like, the next session, oh my God, I thought I was going to watch my own stuff, and now I got to be able to work it out with him. And she's freaking out because she doesn't want, some part of her wants closeness. Another part is saying, no, that's not what's best. I never got it as a child, and I'm not safe with it now. And that's when the really deep work. She drug him in, but then found out a lot of it had to do with she was actually more safe with what he was giving her than she thought.
Really, really, really interesting. Yeah. And you brought up a good point, is that the reason that, we get into this trap, the anxious avoidance trap, is because really 2 avoidants, there isn't enough to keep them together. They just keep avoiding each other. And then I would guess, and I'll have you comment on that, but 2 anxious, you just drive each other crazy.
2 anxious are like Velcro, the industrial type, and 2 avoidants are like 2 Teflon.
Yeah. So we get that opposite, to where we, as an anxious, which I totally have an anxious attachment style, but I keep wanting that closeness, and like I've told you, is like Paul is definitely avoidant. And when we read stuff like this, it's just funny. It just makes me laugh almost, because all of a sudden there's an explanation for some of these silly things that we've done over 12 years.
It's ancient wiring that at one time was the best deal. Closeness was not given full permission. In fact, it was not safe. It could be, or it just wasn't modeled. But what it does is it will drive the anxious totally bonkers, because they're anxious is like, I didn't get the closeness and I'm going to lock this thing down. And when they try to lock it down, the other one going, wait a second, it's a trap, and now they're trying to get out. And the more they try to get out, the more you often get the angry pursuer, or they will jackknife the relationship and do an avoidant protest situational. and try to yank their chains. And sometimes that works because underneath, both the anxious and avoidant have the same level of relational anxiety over abandonment. However, those feelings are disconnected.
So interesting. I'm looking forward to the comments on this. I bet lots of us can identify with this. Lots of viewers can. So leave us your comments and questions. I want to hear them. Well, and then number two here is the all or nothing thinking, that when the hits the fan, or when they're seeking distance, they tend to think, oh, I knew she wasn't right for me, this proves it. It's they're being very harsh, very critical.
We call that's why as adults they're called dismissive. Avoidance,
Okay.
technically, children, dismissive. And if particularly if it's a man, it could be a woman, if an avoidant, what feels good to go one up and critical. This is a great, what is one up? It's a movement away from that relational center. And now it doesn't mean that you can't get a lot of criticism from the anxious. They can idealize all they want at first, but the moment they start not getting that they want enmeshed, not connection. And when they don't get it, all sorts of fireworks and criticism come out. But for the avoidant, they often, there's an often subtle grandiosity that keeps them above the fray of the relationship. I'm one up, and I'm not quite sure you're deserving of me. It's called one up and walled off. And there's your avoidance, your dismissiveness. And it's a terrible place to be. I don't know how many couples I've dealt with in which a lot of times it's the man who is one up and walled off, critical. I'm not sure if you're really fit. You've got to, one of these, why don't you just go to a therapist and get your stuff together? I don't need a therapist, but I'll go to this thing with Dr. Salyer just to appease you.
Okay.
That
almost sounds like narcissism a little bit. I'm labeling now.
Yeah, it's a little bit, but it's not coming from the same drive. It's just one up. You can see women do the same. It's where one up and walled off, there's your distance. And distance creates safety, and it keeps them from depending. And at one point in time, it wasn't safe to depend. This is why a lot of times I have to get people a right to separate and belong. It's okay to depend. We all do.
Yeah. Well, that's number three here. You led us right into what they have down for number three is avoidants want to depend less on their partner, that they hate the word dependence and they find that it's a weakness or neediness. So yeah, let's talk about that some more.
Oh yeah. A lot of time avoidants are coming, Spock really set up a lot of avoidance. He really, Benjamin Spock, let him cry it out, right? I talked to Mary Main, who did an attachment study. She's like one of the top 3 researchers in the history of attachment. There's Bowlby, Ainsworth, and Main, the big 3. It's like Einstein, Newton, and Max Bohr in physics, right? And what she told me once privately was in a study in Germany that 80% of babies were avoidant. But 65% of the mothers she coded as secure. And I said, how did that happen? She goes, Benjamin Spock. These mothers were told to betray their secure maternal instincts. And that cry it out. And a baby, if they were left to cry it out, what is the implicit memory? I got to do this on my own.
Yeah.
I have to self-soothe on my own. And how do they self-soothe? What they just did. Their system naturally turns down all those emotions because a baby isn't meant. They don't have the emotional machinery developed yet to be able to self-soothe. This is why we give them parents, so that we are their auxiliary processors until their brain gets the full functioning emotional hardware. And so in every respect, the dismissiveness comes from basically whatever. Now, you can get also parents that maybe don't want the child and stuff, but there's an awful lot of avoidance that got it naturally. And it's in learning to depend. I was one of those. I mean, what do you mean depend? My mother was never there for me. If it, I had to pull myself up from the bootstraps, right? And later on, I will never forget the therapist said, "Who made the boots?" And that's the one question that oh, I didn't do it all by myself. But the
Mhm.
filter is ways I've got to do it. But if you really do a background check here and you get real, it's like, well, there was that third grade teacher. There were some people that gave me more than you. And it's getting them safe to belong, to be
Mhm.
depend again. And oh, that can get ingrained in on 1,000 ways.
Yeah.
It's frustrating for the partner because we all want to know someone needs us. But if we're
Mhm.
not needed, I mean, absolutely, I don't think anybody feels good about that.
No. And they say here that the reason that the avoidant does this, so to speak, is because they have, or they feel like you said, the safety, there's less to lose.
Yes,
It's if you're not dependent, then you really can't lose much. So like you said, a safety
if you're not in
mechanism. And
risk, if you're not
yeah.
invested, there's no risk.
Well, and then number four here, Gary, another sign you may be avoidant or with an avoidant, flaws picking,
Mhm.
that you secretly focus on your partner's flaws versus their positive attributes.
If you see flaws, then you're justified in keeping, you guessed it, one foot out the door. Now,
Yeah.
an anxious that's been thoroughly disappointed can do the same thing, but it's a different driver, right?
Yeah.
The flaws, that old looking just for reasons I can find a way, you guessed it, to leave. It's
Mhm.
it's mental preparation for the day you're justified. And then you can say, well, it was on them. But it was really your feeling primordial often from early life. Depending doesn't do me any good.
Any good.
Occasionally it can be a first relationship where someone really gets burned, maybe in a divorce or a terrible breakup, and some part says, well, I'll never get hurt like that again. You had your bets. And what it does is that distance sets up the criticism from the other that you then
Mhm.
criticize, and now it's become self-fulfilling prophecy. There's no place here for being flawed and fabulous, for loving them for all of themselves and learning to navigate that in a loving way. It keeps
Mhm.
an adversarial position. And who
Yeah.
wants criticism? I mean, in couples research, when there's criticism and defensiveness, which is what this gets into, that's
Mhm.
91% predictor of a breakup, which is probably the point of the strategy, to
Yeah.
get yourself safe, make sure you don't get caught in that bear trap called a relationship, called closeness.
Well, and then number five here kind of goes off on that too, is the take it or leave it. That the anxious, I suppose, the partner compromise or watch the whole thing fall apart into pieces. They're implying here that the anxious has to come to terms with the fact that the avoidant needs the distance and they're never going to really get what they want. Do you agree with that?
No, I don't.
Okay.
That's
Okay.
disempowering
Mm-hmm.
for the anxious. That's not love. Now, I tell you what's underneath that sort of thing. Take it or leave it. You know what that is? Please don't make me feel my feelings. I don't want to feel what it felt like to be abandoned. I don't want to
Mm-hmm.
know what it's like I ever again to feel that pain when mom and dad just didn't want me. A lot of
Mm-hmm.
times they will bury their their memories, and you have a hard time getting them to remember their feelings. Remember what happens? Their brain tones down feelings,
Mm-hmm.
and take it or leave it is a plea to make me not feel my feelings.
Yeah.
Every feeling is a fire-breathing dragon, particularly with men.
I when I was reading this, and I'll ask you, is that what's good about having these conversations, and showing these examples and understanding this, is that I think an avoidant, if you're avoidant, you have the capacity to recognize that. If you're in this situation that, oh my God, maybe that is me, I could do something about it, to where like the narcissist, they would never recognize that there's anything wrong with them, to where at least there's hope in this in this situation, because you do get caught up in this quite often. Any
Yeah,
thoughts on that?
yeah, no. A lot of times, what I will say to somebody, you're an honorable man.
Mhm.
But this distance doesn't help you come off as honorable as you think you do,
Mhm.
because they're being starved emotionally.
Mhm.
Now, I know you want to be a provider, and you're really good at that, but they need emotional sustenance too. Are you willing to help that child in you so you can be the man you want to be? Because
Mhm.
there are honorable avoidants. A lot. We always think of them as Marlboro mate, and they
Mhm.
can be, or the Marlboro man out there, or the James Bond player. He's a
Mhm.
classic avoidant. This can be adjusted,
Mhm.
and it's and if when they're ready to do the work, and if they're not, if they're really not, then you would be better if you're the anxious to stop beating on that door until your knuckles are bleeding.
Mhm. And recognizes it. No, it's super, like I said, super, super interesting. And I'm wondering how many of our viewers really recognize themselves in this situation or can identify. Again, leave your comments, leave your questions. This is such an important topic, as is our, the love traps one that we had, where you have a course on that now that I'd love to have everybody check out, because there are these dynamics and relationships that if we just understand them, we can self-heal well with guidance, get ourselves out of these traps and, be safe to love again. Gary, is there anything else you want to say before we close this down? Mhm.
But you were born to have your feelings and to be able to seek appropriate closeness, to be able to be a me and a we, not
Mhm.
one or the other. It's
Mhm.
your birthright. You will have far more support, and you will be a much better version of yourself.
Well, check out the show notes. We have all of Dr. Salyer's information below, to his book, to his course, to his website, if you want to get in touch with him directly. And Gary, I look so forward to having you again back soon on Second Act TV.
Thank you, Soka.